I have some things that hands down I like better about my Mustang, believe it or not, than the Challenger that I've owned previously. So I have a list of 5 things that I want to share with you guys that I just think Ford and Mustang do a better job at. So guys, really the first thing that comes to my mind that I've really enjoyed with this Mustang Bullitt over the Challenger is the digital gauge cluster. Now, I know I've talked about this a lot. There's things on the digital gauge cluster before that I was like, when I had my Dodge, I was like, I don't think I would really like that. I like the analog gauges, and I still think analog can look cool. However, if you guys haven't played with the digital gauge cluster and just how it changes based on drive mode, I'm really cool into tech like that. I love that I can change the colors of my door sills, or I can change the colors of my cup holders, or, you know, down by my feet. I can change ambient light. I can change so many different things, and I'll show with you guys just some clips, but just the customization of the digital gauge cluster, I think hands down is something that, even though Dodge had some really cool gauges in my Scat Pack, until you've used the digital gauge cluster and played around with it, if I do end up selling the Mustang, I'm gonna have a hard time because I really like the digital gauge cluster. I just love the customization of it, and you can save different modes, different color schemes. Ford, hands down. Chevy does some of it, you know, within their doors and different things, but I really wish Dodge would step it up and provide some type of just color changes within the cabin. I just think it adds a lot to it. The digital gauge cluster, it is amazing. It's something that I think Ford just does better than anyone. So the next thing that I want to talk about is just the size of the car and its maneuverability. Maneuverability. That sounds like a funny word. I'm pretty sure I'm saying it right. Maybe not. But I like just how much more nimble this car is. It fits in my garage better. It's about a foot shorter than the Challenger. It isn't quite as wide. And that is just something that I like because I daily these cars, guys. These cars are not garage queens. It can maneuver in and out of traffic better. By no means is the Challenger horrible, but just the size of this car and how nimble it is, it just is just easier to drive around town. It's easier to park. It's easier to get in and out of tight spaces. It saves room in my garage. It's just easier all around just to kind of get around. Visibility is great, and honestly, visibility in the Challenger is good too. But that is just something that I've appreciated more about the Mustang than I did the Challenger. So back kind of in the business end of the Bullitt Mustang, and I know this is one that some of you aren't going to agree with me on this, and that's okay. I did share a comparison between the 2019 Dodge Challenger Scat Pack and the Ford Mustang Bullitt exhaust clips, and I asked all of you, hey, which exhaust sounds better? To me, it's a very personal preference. Obviously, there's things that you can like that maybe other people don't like. However, the Bullitt Mustang is just tuned differently. It's not going to sound like any GT that you hear out there. I like that in track mode that I get cracks and pops from my exhaust. Challenger has deeper notes for sure. It does sound menacing, but this Mustang, when you drive around with the windows down, people know you're there, and I love it. Like, there's nothing that I want to change to this exhaust. I know people go crazy, but I actually love the cracks and pops, and I actually think the exhaust sounds better than the Challenger. Another thing that I just think is awesome about the Mustang compared to the Challenger, I had manual transmissions in both cars. However, driving manual in this car, I can rev out to 7,500 RPMs. And the Challenger, because of the torque, I felt like I was shifting more. I love, from a manual perspective, just how high this car revs, that you can get up to red line at 7,500 and push it just past that. Whereas the Challenger, you're just over $6,000. And so I like with these Coyote motors over the Challenger from a manual perspective. Now, transmission, don't get me started on that. You guys know how I feel about that. However, being able to run that to 7,500 RPMs and shift, it's fun, guys, and I love it. I love how this car just does in terms of just that 7,500 RPMs. It's just a ton of fun. You know, I shared in my last video how I like the low-end punch better on the Challenger, and just how it pulled really hard, kind of that low end, because it has more torque than the Mustang. The Mustang delivers its torque in a very linear fashion, and you know, when you get up to top speeds, this is where this car really shines. This car will pull away from a Scat Pack when you get above 70, 80 miles an hour. It just will. And I've, you know, taken cars pretty far in terms of limits and where they can go. Don't want to discuss specifics. but all in a safe environment. However, one thing I do love about the Mustang is how hard it pulls on the top end. When you get around 70, 80 miles an hour in this car, it just wants to bury the speedometer. It just keeps going, and that is just something with these Coyote motors, is they're maybe not built so much to perform down low. They do a good job, don't get me wrong, but where they're meant to shine is up on the top end. And that's why I totally understand Mustang owners who get the 10-speed, because that 10-speed makes up for the lack of torque on the low end because of how fast it can shift. But once you get up on that top end, you're gonna have a hard time catching a 5.0 Mustang, and that is just something that, you know, as I did a road trip in this car, it's a great road trip car. Driving down the freeway, you know, passing people, you're gonna get a ticket. You're gonna have a hard time staying on the speed limit because this car just wants to keep pulling and pulling and pulling. Where I felt with the Scat Pack, it is a wild ride up until 60, 70 miles an hour. But once it kind of gets past that, it just starts to fall on its nose just a touch. Don't get me wrong, it still buries the speedometer very well. However, this Mustang, I just love how it pulls on the top end. So obviously there's some things that I love better about the Mustang than my Challenger. I know some of you out there won't believe it, that there's things that I like about this car more than my Challenger. However, there are. And, you know, I think there are honestly some good sticking points. You know, if you could kind of marry the two cars, for me, would just be the ideal, just perfect car. Thank you guys for all the support on the channel, and we'll catch you on the next video.